Okay. I'm wondering if this seems as absurd to you as it does to me. Because I was gonna do this a while back. I don't
Right.
remember exactly when it was. I believe it was the week I ended up doing Killer Joe and Bug.
I think so, actually. No, it was because
The
we didn't
plan-
have the.
The plan was to do this, but it was just I was thinking about it and I was like, how does one even review these movies? I don't know, because if they were bad movies, like if I hated them, they'd be pretty easy to review.
Right.
Oh, but I don't hate them, as you can see. So it's just how do you go about? How does one analyze Space Jam exactly? Just how does that even? Yeah.
Let's throw the Sigmund Freud
And
right
I
out
was
on the table immediately.
And I was so taken by this, I was like, I'm just gonna talk about William Friedkin's movies with crazy shit instead. So finally, I decided, okay, we'll go ahead and do this. Because since it's, Christmassy and everything, I just recently watched Gremlins again. So I was in that Dante mood. So I was like, okay, well, it's time to revisit It's back in action, I suppose. So we'll go ahead and do this. Because when you look at, Gremlins and The Howling and Explorers and all that, you immediately think, oh yeah, Looney Tunes Back in Action's right in there. So, and I believe that's actually the one we're going to start with. And yeah, I say that as if this is a totally random thing in Dante's filmography, but in actuality, if you have a flashback to Gremlins 2, Joe Dante doing it with the Looney Tunes is totally not random. So, we come to this, and this came out it was like late 2003, I think. Because I saw it when it came out.
Same year.
And this was basically like, Space Jam was the shit when it came out. And it was great. Especially if you were like 6 years old at the time like I was. But over time, let's just say Space Jam didn't hold up. And people started to hate it a lot. And it kind of became a bit of a punchline. So, Looney Tunes Back in Action was kind of like the rejuvenation of putting the Looney Tunes in with live action. So much so, I specifically remember way back to 2003 when Brendan Fraser was on Conan promoting this. And he dissed Space Jam when he did it.
Oh, wow.
Because Conan started to get into build up about it. He was talking about the movie and saying what he liked about it. And he kind of prefaced it with, this is not Space Jam. This is something so much better. And when he said this is not Space Jam, there was kind of an ooh and then cheering. So, so it was always kind of the fuck you Space Jam movie. And to the point that the scene where Steve Martin's character is unzipping himself and he's a whole bunch of people underneath, one of them is Michael Jordan, literally cut out of Space Jam and put into this movie. And it's the scene where he says, let's do some drills. And then he's just gone. It's just to say, hey, we remember you, Space Jam, fuck you. Anyway, we'll get to Space Jam soon enough. But for now, the main plot involves the disappearance of Fraser's father, who is Timothy Dalton. And Timothy Dalton is playing an actor who is in movies that look an awful lot like James Bond movies. So he's a stuntman, and we get this whole, a lot of this movie is a satire on Hollywood, which is actually really cool. Where we see the stuntman scene with Roger Corman's the director, who popped up in The Howling and probably other Dante movies, if I remember. I gotta like do a Dante marathon or something. I have a friend who just recently put Joe Dante montage together that is awesome. And that's just kind of what she does as a hobby, and this one turned out really, really good because Dante's kind of one of those directors that everybody knows, but I don't feel like enough people know his name. But he's kind of gone by the wayside of his career. I just reviewed Burying the Eggs recently, and that was his latest one. Fuck that, but Here he was still kind of in a pretty decent place. This may very well have been the last decent movie he made, though I missed The Hole, but we'll see how that goes. What happens here is it's kind of... He's basically kind of doing a send-up of Hollywood and all that, but in a sense he's also kind of doing a send-up of his own movies, which are already kind of send-ups to begin with, when you look at, like, Gremlins 2, for instance. And so there's this movie could have very easily failed, or it could have succeeded. And, well, obviously it didn't become anything landmark or anything. I think it got a relatively decent reception when it came out. And if so, for good reason. On top of, I mean, while there's a lot of clever stuff in it, it's also kind of got pop culture overkill. One particular scene that comes... They're kind of scattered throughout, but one particular scene that comes to mind is when, Bugs is in... the water tower is collapsed and there's a flood. And Bugs pulls up in a boat and he's got a fishing rod and he says, "Oh, look, I found Nemo." And Nemo had only come out, like, 5 months before this. So it was kind of like one of those really, really cheap grabs of that whole audiences will recognize this, thus laugh thing. And they didn't even wait. So the jokes like that kind of fall a little flat, but for the most part, they do work. And there's some really clever stuff in here. There's a lot of, not only just as a satire Hollywood, there's a lot of callbacks to older movies as well, like Robbie the Robot from Forbidden Planet, obviously, and then there is well, the thing about it is when they go to that it's Area 52, the place. Area 51 is a hoax to keep people from finding out about Area 52. Joan Cusack so helpfully tells us. And once we're inside Area 52, it's basically Dante Land. This is just everything, like the science lab in Gremlins 2 and all that. It just gives you all kinds of vibes of that. And just this whole love of Hollywood. That's where Robbie the Robot is. There's this really cool moment where Kevin McCarthy from Invasion of the Body Snatchers comes out holding a pod, still saying, "You're next." And he's still in black and white as he walks by. It's like the Humphrey Bogart scene in Last Action Hero, is what it reminds me of. And of course, that scene in Invasion of the Body Snatchers is featured in Gremlins as a whole kind of foreboding thing in there. So there's just a whole kind of bunch of things connecting here. One of my favorite scenes of the movie is we're painting through this restaurant, and we're seeing all the different Looney Tunes having dinner and stuff. And we see Scooby and Shaggy having dinner with Matthew Lillard. And Shaggy's complaining about the way he was portrayed in the movie. And it just passes by just really quickly. And then there's the stuff they like to toy with where Brendan Fraser's character was Brendan Fraser's stunt double in The Mummy. And Brendan Fraser's character gets to confront the real Brendan Fraser for being an asshole at the end of the movie. And the whole movie just kind of has a lot of fun with this kind of stuff. There's also Goldberg is Steve Martin's henchman. Ron Perlman's in there putting on... I don't know if that's actually him doing a voice or if it's audio over him, but regardless, it's funny as hell. Because the voice is so inappropriate when you realize it's Ron Perlman. Robert Picardo, who's also a Dante regular. He was Eddie in The Howling, and he was the one that got attacked by the female gremlin at the end of the second movie. Are all in there in Steve Martin's little boardroom. And I guess before I go on, let's talk about Steve Martin, because this is interesting. Because when you just kind of look at him and you realize the kind of performance that it is, this is the kind of stuff that's either going to win Razzies or be brilliant.
Right.
It's just a matter of who you're dealing with and how they deal with it. And I don't remember. I don't know how people took to Steve Martin in this movie. I have no idea. But he's so over the top and stupid. But it's fucking hilarious. Steve Martin is fucking just every time he's on screen. There's one particular scene that I really love. It's the zipper scene where Michael Jordan shows up, and he's wearing that safari hat, and he's reaching around to unzip himself to show that he's Timothy Dalton underneath, but he keeps reaching over and he can't get there. And he's like, we did this in rehearsals, but I wasn't wearing the hat. It's because of the hat that I can't reach it. And I'm like, when you watch him do that, it's such like a Steve Martin bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's something he would have done in his stand-up. So I really, really love moments like that. Another great thing is how they kind of they basically modernize it, but in the way that it. Yeah, the pop culture stuff's in there, and that doesn't always help. But they also do it in a humorous way, like and a satirical way, like I was saying, with when Jenna Elfman's having to talk about bugs, and they're talking about a female counterpart, and he does referring back to the whole Ride of the Valkyries thing with Elmer Fudd. He says he's in the dress and the makeup and the wig, and he says, "But I usually play the girl part too." And Jenna Elfman has to tell him, the whole cross-dressing thing is kind of taboo these days, so we can't really let you do that anymore. There's the great moment during the big chase with Yosemite Sam where everybody's throwing dynamite at each other, and he's telling somebody to throw the dynamite, and he says, "But what kind of message will this send to children?" So, that almost made me laugh so hard I almost destroyed this. So I like that they do that, and they're kind of constantly taking jabs at cliches, too. Which is really great in a movie like this. Generally, it could kind of seem full of itself, because it could call out the cliches and then act on them. But this movie does it in a way to where it actually works, amidst the whole concept of everything. There's a really clever scene where they go into all the famous paintings, like the Scream and the melted clocks and the whatever that painting was that Cameron was looking at in Ferris Bueller. And they kind of contort into how the painting is, and it's a really great scene. And I say all this, with all this satirical humor and all the clever jokes in there and all the self-aware stuff, it really, really has the feel of a Muppet movie.
Yeah, I believe that.
The cameos speak for that, too. Which is definitely the good Muppet movies, by the way. There's one or two in there. There's not many bad Muppet movies at all, but they're out there. But I'm talking about the really good ones. And the great thing about it also is, obviously, you bring the Looney Tunes into the real world, and the Looney Tunes are manic, just in nature, hence their name. But the thing about it is, this is non-stop throughout the movie, to a point where you think it would be obnoxious and really overplayed, and you just kind of want them all to die. That's not really the case here. They keep it from reaching that point, and they kind of stay to where, yeah, they're manic amidst the real world and all that, but they never really go past how they would be in their normal environment. So they didn't really overshoot it by doing that, which a lesser movie probably would have done. I'm not necessarily pointing fingers at Space Jam when I say that. I'm just saying a lesser movie would have done it. And I remember I wasn't quite sure how this was going to go down, given the concept and how late it, because it almost seems like kind of a cash on the surface before you've seen it or know much about it. On the surface, it kind of seems like, well, this is what Space Jam did. Maybe we can get away with it because that movie made money. But the thing about it is, I remember specifically going into this. I was only 13 at the time, but still, even then, I was really, really surprised by this movie. And because then, I really like it now and appreciate, how clever it is and how much it tries to do, something funny and satirical and all that. But 13-year-old me, fucking loved this. So, and yeah, it actually holds up. I was really afraid to watch it. That's what I was saying when I watched Gremlins recently. I was like, let's see how Looney Tunes Back in Action holds up. Honestly, I wasn't positive going in. I was not optimistic. But it really does hold up, surprisingly. People may not feel the same way, but that's just me. So I was really surprised that it's actually still I pretty much like it as much as I did before. I'm just kind of the 12 years later in state of mind. So, yes. And now, Space Jam. Now we're going back to when I was like 6. This is another movie I saw when it came out, back when we had like 3 auditoriums instead of 12.
Yeah.
Remember that?
It feels like forever ago.
So, this movie right off, and at the time, I think it was kind of somewhat, even though people did start bashing it after a while, it was applauded for kind of being a winning concept. You have a basketball player who's on top of the world, and you have cartoon characters. You just put them in the same movie, and you put basketball in it, and people will fall in love.
Right.
But at the same time, when you look back on the process, probably a lot of red flags and question marks come to mind. Because this is... the director of it is the guy that directed, like, the commercials. Like, the Nike commercials and shit. Or whatever it was, all that he did. Those famous commercials where he's just, like, flying through the air and shit. That guy directed this movie. And it was basically, you talk about product placement, this movie was basically birthed from a commercial where Michael Jordan and Bugs Bunny like had a basketball match or something. And they were like, let's make this feature length. If that were to happen today, everybody's response would be, oh fuck, why? But but at the time, this shit really worked.
Right.
And they're not even really shy about it too, because there's even there's the whole product placement thing. There's the funny scene where Wayne Knight comes to his hotel room and in one sentence mentions every single sponsor that Jordan has. Like the whole lace up your Nikes and grab your Wheaties, and on our way to the ballpark we'll pick up a Big Mac, and he says like all of them in one sentence. And there's a few that I missed in there, but and there's the moment when they're in Jordan's house looking for his shoes, and Bugs and Daffy have a conversation about getting the rest of the money for the merchandising that they're owed. So this movie's not shy about the whole commercialism surrounding it. So knowing that it's kind of embracing it from the start like that, kind of gives it a few extra points. Because it doesn't feel like, once that's in your mind, it doesn't really feel cheap. It doesn't feel like it's just saying, hey, 6 and 7-year-olds, let me take your parents' money. I'm sure that's on their brain a little bit because that's the whole concept, but being self-aware of it in this particular context helps, actually. Because we actually start off really well, because it's actually a legitimately touching scene, that opening scene with him and his dad, where he's shooting in the middle of the night because he can't sleep. And then we go into what was, for people of my age in the 90s, the greatest opening credit sequence of all time. People still love that opening credit sequence. It just fucking gets you jacked up, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. No, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if nostalgia's a factor or not. That's kind of an awesome opening credit sequence. And then from there on, we kind of, we do get stupid, but then again, you kind of have to expect stupid when one of the very first locations we're on in this movie is a place called Moron Mountain. You kind of should know what you're in for. And we meet these aliens who are run by Danny DeVito. Danny DeVito as an alien named Swackhammer who's constantly smoking cigars. And wears purple suits. And he's basically playing an 80s Danny DeVito character in a 90s cartoon atmosphere. And yeah, the aliens come down to Earth. They literally suck the talent out of the basketball players and play basketball with the Looney Tunes. Because otherwise they'll take them to Moron Mountain to be slaves. Need I say this one more time? You kind of know what you're in for.
Very true.
When you look at the stuff. Come on. And you just have to embrace it. This movie certainly embraces it. Why can't we? And yeah, the thing I was talking about that Looney Tunes Back in Action does right, where they're manic, but they're not obnoxious, Space Jam kind of has trouble finding that balance. They're they're obviously supposed to be manic. They're supposed to be fucking loony, clearly. But they're really, really manic and loony in this. Like, maybe where we reach overkill and stuff like that. And the animation is a little too, like when I was talking about the first SpongeBob movie with the second SpongeBob movie, how you can tell where it's more the old-fashioned animation and when it's the really touched-up stuff that just looks weird. That's kind of what's going on here, too, where in Space Jam they're a little probably too touched up. They all look like fucking shiny. But but obviously the stuff is still in there. There's one of the moments I really love is when we're calling back to like the old stuff. Like there's the moments where the Roadrunner goes through the wall, and then when the Coyote tries it, it's just a fucking curtain. One of the scenes I really love that kind of goes in like the opposite direction of that is when Jordan's kids are watching the Roadrunner, and he's just doing his thing, and then Porky comes out and goes to get them for a Looney Tune meeting. And the set's just abandoned there and stays on the TV while the kids are clueless as to what's happening. That's a really funny scene. And then we have some live action characters also on top of Wayne Knight's character is a very pathetic sight. They might have you cringing once or twice, but that just is the genius of Wayne Knight. To just make this character as more and more pathetic as the movie goes, just when you think he's reached his peak. He just gets worse as it goes. It's to that point to where Jordan so badly does not want him to play in the big game. We've had the mouse go out there. We have the bird in the body cast. Tweety is in an iron lung before he ever goes out there. And then he's immediately taken out. It's kind of fucking hilarious. And then we have one of the great cameos of the past 20 or so years. Everybody loves the Bill Murray cameo.
Yes.
Which, of course, makes perfect sense when you go back and see that Ivan Reitman produced this movie. Which they even call out. Because this was obviously a joke that never occurred to me way back in 96 or 97. Mm. When Murray runs out onto the court at the end, and Daffy says, "How did you get here?" And Murray says, "I'm a friend of the producer."
That's great.
The funniest joke in the entire movie is when Bill Murray makes the big introduction, and Swackhammer mistakes him for Dan Aykroyd. To me, I think that's the funniest joke in the whole movie. And of course, we have there's a lot of digs at Disney, because they were kind of competing at the time. Of course, the most blatant one probably is, they're talking about making their own team, and Daffy says there should be a team called the Ducks, and Bugs says what kind of Mickey Mouse organization would name their team the Ducks? And there's all kinds of that stuff in there where Warner Brothers and them are kind of duking it out with this. There's the whole thing with the players after they lose their talent. They think they've lost their minds or they have health problems, so they go through all the tests and they go to a psychiatrist, and we see Charles Barkley praying, and it's all of that stuff is actually really funny. There's actually a scene, I don't know if it's supposed to be funny or what, but I think honestly this movie has a really sincere moment in it amidst all this craziness. Maybe I'm alone in this, I don't know. I always thought as a kid it always bummed me out. And then watching it nowadays, trying to catch up with it, it's still like, damn, that's sad. The scene where Charles Barkley goes to the basketball court and gets beat by the girls. And they don't even, to the point that they don't even think it's him. That's actually a really sad scene. And like, even as a kid, it always kind of got to me. So yeah, you would think, because that's the thing, is you kind of think, being basketball players and stuff like that, they're just going to kind of go through this and say bad dialogue badly and just kind of go on with it. And yeah, Michael Jordan's gotten a lot of shit for this movie. Well, I'm going to throw an opinion out there. And if you don't agree with it, which I'm sure you don't, that's fine. But honestly, I think Michael Jordan is pretty good in this movie. Like, actually, because here's the thing, granted, he's not very expressive, but he's got some kind of charisma in the way he actually interacts with them. Because it's one thing where you could see somebody just kind of sleepwalking through this, like, what the fuck am I doing here? Kind of looking at the camera, like, saying, get me out of here, this is stupid, what has my career come to? You can kind of tell that he's into it. Like, he actually seems like he's talking to everybody that's around him that's animated, and being in these animated worlds. And he's kind of, his kind of downplayed, I know people probably think I'm putting it very kindly by saying downplayed, but, how he's kind of a contrast to what it's like in the real world and how he looks in this animated world. It makes him look very, very, wooden and unexpressive. But I think he does it really well, and like I think I really buy that he's talking to Bugs and Daffy and whoever is there that's not actually there with him. So I think he really doesn't get kind of, I mean, you can say that a lot. People say that a lot about performances that really don't warrant it. It's become popular to say that person doesn't get enough credit for insert shitty role. But I'm being totally serious here, honestly. Give the dude a break, because he's really not that bad in this. Now, what else have we done? There's some jokes where it's kind of they're going for the adults thing too, like when Yosemite Sam and Elmer Fudd do Pulp Fiction. It's kind of from out of nowhere. It has no context. It's just kind of there, and you don't know whether to love it because that's what it is, or if it's like that really has no relevance. But at the same time, it's the fucking Looney Tunes. They kind of live for irrelevancy. They just do whatever they're gonna do. So that's okay. I really love the moment when Foghorn Leghorn gets fried, like, all the way down. And just in a very calm voice, he just says, "Did you order the original recipe or the extra crispy?" And I've always loved that line, and his very weak delivery of it, when he's known for being so boisterous. And yes, now the big question is, does it hold up or not? And to be honest with you, I have no idea, because I go back and forth. Because I watched this movie a few years ago, and I was like, wow, this really holds up. This is like a really, really fun time. I'm like really into this. And then I kind of watched it again a little later, and I was like, I am not sure anymore. It seems a lot more child-friendly than I remember. I don't know. And when I say child-friendly, of course, I mean like kind of that, bottom of the barrel jokes and stuff like that. So yeah, but it's very, very much a product of the 90s. So even if, it's not even necessarily a nostalgia thing. It's just, it's definitely a thing of its little era here. it's like a time capsule or something. To where it's like, did you know that when this was released it was popular? Because there's no fucking way that would happen today, I don't think. Because they keep talking about that sequel they want to do with, like, LeBron James or something. And it's still got an IMDb page after all these years. I don't know. I don't think it would have the same impact now that it did back then, by any means. But, and there's the whole thing where what's the point of the big game because of how much the score fluctuates? Because it's like, they have like 18, and then the Monstars have it to where it just runs out, and the sign just says kind of one-sided, isn't it? And it just stops keeping score. But then suddenly they keep up. They catch up to them and ultimately beat them, and the score, when it started scrolling like that, is basically only like 10 away from what it was. So if you're looking for like suspense and, hoping these characters come out, but you're not quite sure they're going to, you're totally in the wrong place, man. You're watching a movie where the Looney Tunes are going to be captured by little tiny aliens, and so Bugs' thing is to, let's not step on them, let's not send them back to their planet, let's not ridicule them, let's play basketball with them. That'll work. Yeah, but I think it totally embraces that whole thing, and you just kind of have to run with it in hopes that you get some kind of enjoyment out of it. A lot of people get the so bad it's good thing out of it. Some people just don't like it at all. But yeah, you just kind of have to take it for what it... Like, I go back and forth as to whether or not it holds up. Sometimes I feel like it does. Sometimes I'm really not sure. But, So if you're looking for like something really solid and like a solid foundation to where you you have a much better chance of enjoying yourself, I'd go with Looney Tunes Back in Action for sure. But it just depends on who you talk to as to whether or not, because Space Jam is one of those movies that is one of two drastically different things depending on who you're talking to. You can talk to one person and it's one of the worst movies ever. You can talk to a completely different person, it's a masterpiece. And it's, hold on, I said masterpiece by accident. I meant to say classic. You talk to one person, it's one of the worst movies ever made. You talk to the other person, it's a classic.
Okay, there you go.
It just depends on who you're talking to. So, yeah, but
that's what we've got.
Yes.
All right. So it's another edition of Versus. Next week is the final Versus of 2015, and we're going to go back to fairy tales again.
It's unusual.
Yeah.
But I kind of can't see it going any other way. So
yeah.
I'm just gonna kind of do something that I'm not quite sure how it's gonna go down. We'll just see.
Versus in 2016 will be continuing. We will let you know on social media exactly what's going on with that, and what the week after's Versus is going to be for 2016. So continue to watch the great segments here on Pop, and of course we have some more great stuff for you guys: wrestling content, movie content, sipping snacks, Halloween Horror Nights content still to come, and a lot of great things. So stay tuned. Go to @Popcast Network to follow along Pop's Twitter, and @Sro and Disney for my Twitter. So that being said, thank you guys and girls out there for watching. AJ, any parting words?
That's it.